Hi everyone. Today I've got Ker Zheng here from Azoya to talk about cross-border e-commerce and especially about Tmall Global. Azoya is a e-commerce operator and they work across different categories from health, beauty to mum and baby. So I'm really glad to have you here today. Hi Ker.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very very honored to be here today.
So, I mean, I think what I really wanted to talk to you about was this piece of content that you guys put out a few months ago about cross-border e-commerce and specifically about how Tmall Global works for brands. So, first of all, why is Tmall Global one of the better places for brands to look at when they're looking at cross-border e-commerce?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reasons. I think one is it's the largest. I think market share wise, Tmall Global is probably, I don't know, 30% of the market, and then Kala is another like 25-30%, and then JD is probably like 12%. This is just
Yeah, and
cross-border.
Alibaba now own Kala, right? So like
Right, right,
Alibaba
right.
together is more than 50%.
Yeah. But they're still separate platforms, and I
Yep.
can get into that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But another reason is that Tmall results can be found in Taobao search results. So if a Taobao user is searching for, I don't know, milk powder, they'll see results from both Taobao and Tmall. And so if you look at the combined ecosystem of Tmall and Taobao, it's over 600 million users. And I think JD's is only like half of that or something like that. And another reason is that it's probably has the broadest appeal amongst consumers in China. I think JD, by comparison, has always struggled to sell to female consumers. It started out as an electronics platform, but I mean, to sell fashion and beauty products on JD is very difficult. And then the third platform, Kaola, it's more of a direct buying relationship between the platform and the supplier. So Kala will buy inventory from suppliers, and then they buy it at bulk, and then they get a big discount, and then they pass on the discount to the end consumer. But they usually prefer to buy well-known brands that can drive immediate sales. So for a platform catering to third-party suppliers, I think Tmall is still the best option out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of Tmall, obviously Tmall has several different business models, which brands, and the ones that most brands have heard of is the flagship store, but they also have TDI, TOF. So can you give us a little bit of a sort of overview of the different options there are for brands?
Yeah, so flagship store is basically B2C e-commerce in which the brand owns the store, and then they hire a TP to run the store and do the marketing and customer service for them. So they're selling directly to Chinese consumers, but they're also, responsible for the budget that goes into marketing and whatnot. And TDI, or Tmall Direct Import, is kind of a smaller program in which Tmall will buy inventory directly from suppliers, and then they're in charge of the sales and marketing. So they have their own flagship store, both
multi-brand.
Yeah. Then, they do the discounting and the promotions for Singles Day and stuff like that. And then the goods are parked in bonded warehouses in Chinese free trade zones. But the downside of this program is that, Tmall only wants the more larger, popular, well-known brands because they can better predict demand. They can buy inventory in bulk and then sell it at a discount. So that's like the value add. They can provide really good prices to the end customer. They don't want to take new brands that, are still struggling to gain brand awareness. So that's more of a B2B relationship, and TPs like us, we're not involved. And then TOF, Tmall Overseas Fulfillment, is also kind of a new program in that it's open to smaller, less
Yeah,
well-known brands, and they park their inventory in Tmall or China warehouses in the US or Europe.
yeah.
And then Tmall is also responsible for the sales and marketing. I think they purchased a TP to handle these stores. But basically, they do the sales and marketing, and then the goods are only shipped to the Chinese consumer after they make a
Make
purchase.
purchase. Mm.
So it's kind of like an incubation program, but to my knowledge, it's still a relatively small program. TPs like us are not directly involved, so I don't know that much about it.
Sure, sure.
Um,
But also, as a brand, you would have to be willing to put your China marketing strategy into the hands of Tmall team as they're managing lots of different brands at the same time. And I think it depends on your goals as a brand. But if you're looking for long-term equity in the market, then you'd be much better off probably to go with someone like you guys, where you're in the market and you're building a brand on a flagship store, and you actually got your own retail, like real estate as such.
yeah, yeah. I mean, with TOF, the brand has to put in less resources, but they also have less control, right?
Yeah,
That's the main difference. Yeah.
yeah. It's a balance, delicate balance that brands have to think about, I guess. So for you, for like, if we're talking about sort of the route that your clients, your clients work on, the biggest challenge for new brands on Tmall. So when you bring a brand on board, obviously you've had some that are already really established, and then some that are newer. What would you say the biggest challenges that they face when they first start on Tmall?
I think it's hard to get brands to kind of accept the fact that the customer journey is just longer in China.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say there's two main reasons. One is because there's a general distrust of new brands, and then two, the ecosystems of the various internet platforms in China are just so dislocated and separate from each other. For example,
Mm-hmm.
you can't put Tmall links on WeChat.
Yeah.
But at the same time, social media is where a lot of the brand building is done, right? So if you just
Mm-hmm.
set up a store on Tmall and you don't do anything else, then you're not going to get much in terms of sales. And it takes a while to do this. And then, the advertising on social media platforms like WeChat and Weibo, they're less targeted.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of harder to see ROI because a lot of the budget has been shifted towards KOLs. And so it's kind of hard to see, you're spending this much on marketing, but, only leading to this much in sales. It's harder to see a direct correlation, which is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
I guess that's where the appeal of live streaming comes in. If you do e-commerce live streaming, then the problem
Yeah.
is the ROI is normally not great. It depends, but
Yeah.
it's quite an expensive process, isn't it?
Yeah. There's live streaming can be really complex. You can either do it yourself or you can hire an influencer. You can either use small influencers or you can use large influencers. There's a lot of different platforms that have it now. In our experience, the only ones that drive a lot of sales are the very, very top influencers.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll charge like 30% commission. They might require you to discount your product by, I don't know, another 30% or 40%.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can drive a lot of sales, but at the end of the day, is there a profit? And a lot of times it's just no. And then smaller influencers, I think, they drive brand awareness, but it's harder for them to drive immediate sales. So I guess you have to look at it as more of like a long-term brand building type of play.
Yeah.
It's getting very competitive now. Everyone's trying to do it, and so you have to figure out how to stand out.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that is a way of looking at it. If you go even with the big guys that will maybe shift quite a lot of product, is it a brand awareness play? Is it rather than just because as you said, to make the ROI straight off one live streaming is very difficult, considering all the different factors that you have to, the commission and the discount.
Yeah.
So.
I think when we worked with Pixie, we worked with Austin Lee to do a live streaming session for Double 12, and then we also worked with, I think, another like 10 or 20 other small influencers at the same time, to kind of like, you know, seed the brand and then spread it around their respective networks. So, you know, it immediately, like, you have, you know, a decent amount of sales, but a lot of the sales actually comes in the next month or two, because people, they might not make a purchase on that first glance, but they'll come back to it, and then, you know, you can use retargeting ads to target the same consumers that browse the product page. So, you know, you should give it a little bit more time before you know, call it quits.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Look at the long tail, like look at over a certain period of time and see. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then, so obviously Tmall, like it's the biggest and it is a great option. But if your brand is, say, a smaller brand, what other options would you suggest for a brand coming into the market and looking to sort of get some traction, but maybe not on Tmall?
The main platforms would be WeChat and Xiaohongshu. Yeah, I think, you know, we work with brands. We would typically launch a WeChat store and a Xiaohongshu store a couple months before the Tmall store, or maybe even earlier. But it's still, you know, there's still social media platforms, and I think there's still, you know, reluctance on the consumer's part to make actual purchases on these platforms. So in our experience, you know, even if you launch on all three, WeChat, Xiaohongshu, and Tmall, you know, 90% of the sales will come from Tmall. I think it's different for different categories, and it's also different if you already have an existing official account with a lot of, you know, content on it. So there are certain players that, you know, have run WeChat content for years and years before launching on Tmall. And then, you know, these are the type of brands that it's easier to get sales because they already have an existing number of followers. But if you're starting from scratch and you have 0 followers on WeChat, Xiaohongshu, it's going to be really hard because it you know, it's expensive to get followers on these platforms too. And it takes time.
But I mean, I guess something that brands should think about, even if they're in it for the long term and they're looking at, you know, a reasonable horizon in terms of making a good return on investment, then it's all about initially building up that awareness, right? So as you said, some brands have been on WeChat for a while, just giving good quality content to their audience, and really working out who your customer is, because that's something that I always talk to people about. China's so enormous, you know, you've got to really dial down to work out what customer you're targeting, because, you know, there's 1.3 billion people. Like, there's a lot of options.
I mean, with marketing, you should definitely be on these platforms anyways. I think if you're expecting a lot of sales, it can be tricky. I mean, there's always cases where something will go viral and then, you know, you all of a sudden see a spike in sales. But there's a lot of different things you can do in WeChat now. So there's things with, you know, private traffic. Now, you know, brands are starting to use WeChat Work to set up their own WeChat private groups. And then, you know, people are doing live streaming within WeChat and then using these groups to kind of facilitate discussions. So, I mean, both WeChat and Xiaohongshu, they're launching more and more tools for brands. So I think that's a good sign. Yeah, I mean, it's still difficult that the infrastructure is not in place. And then, you know, historically, Xiaohongshu has had a lot of issues with logistics and supply chain. So, you know, it's still kind of difficult.
Yeah, and ultimately, as you said, like, the consumer behavior is not there, right? The consumers go to Xiaohongshu to search for information about products and brands. they don't, like to see how people are using the product, what people are saying about the product, not purchase. That's not the intent of going to the platform. So I think that's where obviously Tmall has a massive advantage over both WeChat and over most of the other.
You could see it as a branding play too, because there are cases in which brands have stores on all three platforms, but they'll launch some exclusive products on WeChat only because it's their own official store, or they'll do like a co-branded collection with an influencer or some other brand that's only available on WeChat. So you can kind of cultivate that sense of exclusivity, but it generally only works when you're a little bit more well known. Not when you're
when you're first starting out. Yeah. And I think something actually that I think you guys were talking about the other day, because originally quite a few smaller brands would come onto WeChat for cross-border e-commerce first, because they could use the postal route to get products in from Hong Kong rather than the the cross-border, the traditional cross. But things have changed now with COVID. They're checking a lot more parcels, and it's being a bit trickier to do that route. Is that right?
Yeah, to our knowledge, they're checking a lot of I think the majority of the parcels now. Before it used to be, like 5 or 10%. Right?
Yeah.
And then now I think they're checking most of them.
So basically that's closing that route, right? Yeah.
Trickier, yeah.
Yeah. I guess there's no surprise there with the change with the Daigou, and then now probably, hopefully, cruelty-free. Cruelty-free. For some products will be able to come in cruelty-free, and then slowly these different routes get closed, and it gets sort of centralized into something more organized. It makes
there's
sense.
Always ways around it. I mean, you talk to different orders and logistics providers, and they'll come up with it, but it might take longer, and then the customer experience won't be as good, and then there's always different kinds of issues to take into consideration.
Yeah, and that's something that brands have to be aware of. The Chinese consumer is probably the fussiest, most with the highest expectations, most customer service needed in the world. So try not to annoy them, because it's definitely not a good branding strategy. Okay, so then just to finish off, would there be sort of one trend that you think a beauty brand considering the China market should really look at the moment, or be aware of?
I would say that one trend that I'm following, but I think doesn't get a lot of press, is kind of the emergence of local Chinese brands. There's been like a few articles out there, but Perfect Diary is probably the most well-known ones, but there's a lot of other ones too, but they don't get a lot of press because no one's ever heard of these brands, right? But in my opinion, I think these local brands are doing the most innovative types of marketing tactics. They're the ones that are doing co-branded partnerships with milk tea brands and museums, and one brand did a co-branded collection with a Baiju brand. So I mean, there's a lot of other things like virtual influencers, private traffic groups on WeChat, and it's crazy. These brands, they launch so many new items within such a short period of time. I think foreign brands in the beauty space, they probably only launch new products like once a year or something. But something like Perfect Diary, they launch new products like once every quarter. And I think in retrospect, if you look at foreign brands that do this kind of stuff, only Zara and Uniqlo come to mind.
Yeah.
And they've been some of the most successful foreign brands in China. But it just goes to show that's what you kind of need to do to keep up. I mean, if you're looking to do something cool and innovative, I think it's a good idea to follow what these local Chinese brands are doing. They're raising lots of venture funding, and then they're definitely capturing the mid end of the segment of the market in China. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think there, I mean, as you said, Perfect Diary is something that has been talked about a lot, but there are plenty of others, and they're all doing interesting things that maybe foreign brands don't have the, you know, especially smaller foreign brands, that it's such a big thing to get their head around the China market and the ecosystems anyway, to then think about how do I create virtual influencers or private traffic groups, or, you know, like it's just, there's
Yeah,
just so many things to think about. But in terms of looking at keeping an eye on what they're doing, I definitely agree. I think that's it'll be an interesting space to watch over the next few years. And also, I think what will be interesting to see if we can see a luxury Chinese brand, because of most of these ones that we're seeing now, they're as you said, they're mid-tier, right?
yeah,
They're sort of a couple of hundred RMB for an eyeshadow or whatever. But
yeah.
a luxury, I think there will be a luxury Chinese brand coming up, you know, that will be interesting
At some
globally as
point.
well. Yeah,
Yeah,
at some point.
it's hard because when you think about it, I mean, you look at the luxury space um, globally, and it's still dominated by the same, you know, 5 or 6 French or Italian brands
Yeah,
out there.
yeah, that's
And,
true.
you know, they took, you know, 50, 60 years to build these brands. So, you know, well, how long is it going to take to build like a local,
This
you know,
is
luxury
China.
brand?
Everything that like shrinks down, and it takes, you know, a fraction of the time. So we'll
Right.
see. We'll see. But all right. Okay. Well, that was really good, and thank you very much. If people want to get in touch with you or hear more about what Azoya does, and as I said at the beginning, Azoya puts out a lot of great English language educational information about people, about e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce in China. So I think LinkedIn is probably the best place for people to connect with you.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to reach me directly, I'm on LinkedIn. We have a website, www.azoyagroup.com, and there's contact information there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to reach me personally, I think LinkedIn is probably a good medium to do it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome.